Mr. Speaker, proposition tells you today that the future is uncertain. And when we have a group of people who are entrepreneurs and who are investing their money in an uncertain future, we believe that they have a right to know so that they can be as accurate as possible in making the right decisions. Which is why today on proposition we are extremely supportive of allowing insurance companies to consider the results of genetic tests in assessing potential customers. We're going to make 2 points. Firstly, we're going to look at the definition of today's model. Secondly, we're going to be looking at the extent of the right of the private sector to differentiate between potential clientele. Thirdly, we're going to be looking at the practical consequences of taking this proposal, and an extra substantive will be given by my partner. So before that, a brief definition. It's very simple, Mr. Speaker. We take this in all the democracies, and especially I think this applies in the United States, where private health companies have different standards apart from the public mandate given by Obamacare very recently. We allow the private sector like Blue Shield and AIG to be able to assess and access people's genetic records to look for potential genetic diseases which might increase the potential for them asking for a payoff. What will they be looking for? They'll be looking for things like diabetes, they'll be looking for things like signs of hereditary cancer, or something like increasing the risk of heart disease, Mr. Speaker. We don't think, Mr. Speaker, that the businesses are automatically going to necessarily not allow these people to insure healthcare. We think that that is for the businesses to decide what to do with that information. If they want to refuse it, they can do so. If they want to set higher premiums, they can do so. So what do we tell you on our side? Firstly, we tell you that the right of the private sector to differentiate exists. So, as long as it is connected to their profit. What kind of discrimination do we not allow in the status quo, Mr. Speaker? We don't allow discrimination based on, for example, race or sexuality or gender, where it has nothing to do with the profits which are concerned with that the company is dealing with, right? The workforce, whether it be primarily black or primarily white, is probably going to have the same kind of profit. What we do allow these people to discriminate on, for that, Mr. Speaker, is things which do have a direct connection with the performance of the company. Such as, for example, allowing these people to access the academic records of prospective employees because they want good employees with higher performance capabilities. Or, Mr. Speaker, being able to look at criminal records of prospective employees in order to make sure that this person is a trustworthy person, to say that this person can work in the workplace without stealing their money at some future time, Mr. Speaker. We think that therefore, as long as it is connected to profit, companies do and can and should differentiate based on these kind of characteristics. So moving on to the health industry. What does the health industry actually do? The profit of the health industry, Mr. Speaker, is directly connected to the health of its clientele. People who have higher health risks are probably going to ask for more payoffs, leading to less profit for the companies. And that is why we already allow these private health insurers to look at pre-existing conditions in their prospective employees. Blue Shield sets a higher premium for people who smoke. Blue Shield also sets a higher premium for people who are obese, Mr. Speaker, because we recognize that these people are not as healthy as the average human being, having undertaken an activity which compromises their health. Mr. Speaker, why do we ask the genetic data? Because genetic illness, as we told you in the definition, is also relevant. There are some things which are passed down from generation to generation, which makes the possibility of a payoff extremely likely. Look at diabetes. People who have diabetes are probably going to have to go through dialysis machines, right? But if you go through more dialysis machines than the average person, that person is going to expect to have a lot more payoffs and ask for a lot more money. We think that just in the same case you are able to discriminate between smoking and other pre-existing conditions, so should companies have access to health, the genetic makeup of each clientele. Why we think that the private sector is allowed to do this? Or rather, Mr. Speaker, they're probably going to say, look, it's not their responsibility. They weren't born like that. Precisely, Mr. Speaker, except that the private sector is under no moral obligation to take into account the equality and the lottery of birth. If you were born naturally stupid and And if you couldn't have a lot of academic ability, that might be a problem for you. You might not get into a good university. You might not be able to achieve the same standard, but the government can still discriminate based on that information, right? Based on what university you attend. So we say, Mr. Speaker, while the government might be under moral obligation to take into account these kind of things which are outside of the individual's control, we tell that the private sector is under no such obligation and do discriminate based on inherent characteristics in the status quo. We see no problem with extending that to include genetic makeup. As it is precisely because, Mr. Speaker, the government sector is on the taxpayers' money's obligation to make sure to take into account things which are outside of individual control. But also, Mr. Speaker, the private sector money is their own investment. It's their money that they earn, and they have the right to do with it as they please, even if it means differentiating people in order to get a profit, Mr. Speaker. Because we believe, firstly, that genetic makeup actually affects the amount of payoffs that these companies are fundamentally going to have to make, and also because we acknowledge and recognize that private sectors are allowed more freedoms and more freedoms to differentiate based on these kind of characteristics, whether they be hereditary or whether they be accidental. We see that there is no reason not to take this proposal. Secondly, we want to look at the practical benefits of this. One of the reasons, Mr. Speaker, why premiums for private health insurers are so high in the status quo is precisely because in the status quo, these genetic probabilities are left to the unknown, are left in the dark, and companies have to make rational calculations based on that. But what we tell you by taking our model, where people are able to get a lot more accurate look at the genetic makeup of that person, and more comes into the open about the information concerning the individual, we tell you that this actually lowers the premium price for people who are healthy, Mr. Speaker. They put it this way, people who have a smoking habit are going to have a higher premium than the rest of the people in the status quo, and we already accept that to be legitimate. But we don't know if this person is inherently at risk of suffering heart disease more than the next person, which means that for these two people, the premium for healthcare is fundamentally the same. What we tell you that by taking this proposal, we are able to differentiate again based on genetic makeup, right? People are more likely to have heart disease for a certain type. People are more likely to have heart disease in one person, people less likely to have heart disease in another. So what we say that this does is this allows the premium to be lowered for a certain group of people, thereby actually making healthcare more accessible to these kind of people who have no genetic flaws, people who do not undertake dangerous habits such as smoking or excessive drinking, Mr. Speaker. We say that by actually being able to know more about your clientele, you're actually able to put a more accurate premium on these kind of people, thereby ensuring that the benefit for certain group of people is assured. We're very proud to propose.
I thank the first affirmative. I call upon the first negative speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So by taking this proposal, we believe those prices of the insurance will be higher for those people who have possibility to get those diseases because of genetics results shows. Or maybe those people who have a genetic possibility can be actually categorized, the special insurance can be actually made for those specific people. But we believe this is really discriminating idea, and this is really unfair for those people who are healthy right now, but they have possibility to actually get it. We are not sure they really get it in the future or not. We believe because this future is not really predictable, even if we see those results of genetics, and we see this is really immoral thing to do, so to be done by the companies who will be very proud to oppose. I have two things to talk about in my speech. Firstly, why using genetic test itself is actually immoral to the society. And second one is how taking this proposal will just make with high value specific people to actually reach or get those insurance to take, and how this will harm those specific people. Before that, something about the previous speaker. So he said that in the US, those blue seals is actually making the specific conditions for people to actually get insurance, and he gave some examples. In their example was like smoking or the obese or all those kind of things. Even for those smoking all kind of option things for the life, people can actually choose to smoke or not to choose to smoke. Because in that sense, because this is the choice of the people, because it's really okay to make this as a condition to reject some people, and this smoking itself can actually lead to the other kind of disease. So in that sense, we are totally okay to make these conditions in the status quo. But I'm gonna talk in my speech is because this genetic is something inherent and something we cannot change. That's why we are very proud of those. And also, he talked about the academic record that is determined by the inherent characteristics of souls. But in that case, we are not reject those people because of the genetics, but the consequence that they can bring for the society. Because they cannot bring consequence that they have a higher skills, that they have a higher knowledge. That's why we cannot actually accept in some jobs, for example, or maybe they cannot be a worker in a civil place or so forth. That is because of the consequence. But really, in the genetic test, we cannot still see the consequence of the result. This result does not show the clear possibility that they surely have those diseases in the future. So we believe that what they have told us is not really applicable to today's model. So moving on to our first point about immorality of doing the test. So we believe because genetic test itself is done for the healthy, even for the healthy people, and even though they are healthy, you might be determined as some you might have heart disease, and you might have the other kind of strong disease, you might have cancer, and you be determined as people who have a bad possibility in the future. But what we think is important here is because this is just a possibility, right? In the status quo, need of insurance is people cannot predict what will happen in the future, what kind of disease you will get. That's why they give their money to the company and get the insurance. In that sense, in the status quo, this customer have pure incentives to actually help themselves or protect themselves. Really, by doing the genetic test, this company will actually try to deny those pure incentives that they are afraid of the future. That's why they want to take this insurance or bet their precious money for the insurance. So really, this act itself, this act itself will lead to the immorality of the company. So to support this, what is the genetic test itself? We believe the genetic test itself is determining the customer to reject to make some customers label as somebody who have a bad possibility, who are not profitable to think about. So in that sense, this possibility is higher, means that even if those persons are really healthy, those companies will recognize them as the people who might get disease, who decide these people get disease. Even if this act itself really bad to do so, because this is actually hinder customers pure view that those companies will help us, or those companies can actually sustain our future also, because this pure incentive is actually helping to get money in the status quo. Really, this act itself is actually the company's incentive itself is really malicious to think about. So we believe this act of the company should be recognized as really immoral thing to do so. So we believe this fact itself should overwhelm the company's right to do everything. We believe company cannot do everything that they want. So we believe as a social role of the company, this act itself is really bad. So we move on to our second point. So in the status quo, everyone who wish to bet money for the insurance can actually get those insurance to reach that insurance, because there are only the only conditions that only see the consequence, right? So you do not really determine people, smoking or this or so forth. Even if they choose it, you can if they choose to do smoke, you can actually grab it. You can actually grab the specific one that for the smokers or so forth. Usually this status situation is totally okay. But after that, what happens is because actually those disease or the disease can actually but not really profitable customers for the company. Those companies will try to reject those persons to get insurance in the same amount of the other person, or they will make the specific insurance which is really high cost compared to the other persons. So usually this is really harmful situation for those customers because those customers, even after that, even though you will be determined that you have a possibility, it does not mean you are really have a disease in the future and you are actually now healthy. And this possibility itself is really not sure. In that sense, because if price really get higher, some people it's really hard to reach for those insurance itself. For example, in the poor people or relatively poor people, it's gonna be really high. It's gonna be really hard to actually get those insurance. For example, in Japan, the people who have a cancer or those people's insurance itself is with people who for those people who have very specific people who are old or those people actually have the special insurance and those people I'm sorry about this. So because those people it's really hard to get those insurance and because those people's life really deprived only because they have a possibility really this is really harmful to the practical.
Mr. Speaker, the entire opposition case today is based on one assumption. For some odd reason, business is required to be moral. Business is required to be responsible before the whole society. Business is required to treat everybody equally, even if it harms their business interests. Mr. Speaker, it is not so, and we have successfully established on our side of the house that. Well, they came up in the very end of their opposition speech with an example of old people who cannot get cancer insurance. Yes, exactly, Mr. Speaker. Age is also something you do not choose. Yet, because of the nature of insurance business, which deals with risks, which differ from one case to another, all people who have higher risks of contracting cancer basically are made to pay higher premiums for that. Nobody sees it as something strange, because company bears those risks, Mr. Speaker. Now, I'd like to start with some refutation, then show you the essence of the philosophical essence of our case, and then provide you with the new arguments, how this will actually provide better healthcare for everyone within our society. First, refutation, Mr. Speaker. First, they claim that higher prices for someone is something unfair. Well, let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, that society is an unfair thing in terms that nobody is treated equally to others when it comes to mine or anybody else's ability. Because Ko is probably going to get a higher score than I. It's unfair, but he's stronger than I, Mr. Speaker. His English is also stronger. I didn't have a chance to live in England or wherever he lived. It didn't depend on on me trying to do so. Yes, it is unfair, but still he's going to get this prize because he's better, Mr. Speaker. This is what society, the principle that society is based upon. So, for example, smoking right now, which gets you a higher premium already in the status quo, does not mean that you are having cancer right now, Mr. Speaker. But it means that you will have a higher risk of getting cancer in the future, and the company acts on that premise, Mr. Speaker. Secondly, young drivers who do not choose their age and do not choose their experience still are charged higher premiums in terms of car insurance, Mr. Speaker, which also does not depend on them. Not bright people in our society, Mr. Speaker, which also sometimes is genetic, are not guaranteed every one of them the jobs of CEO of huge companies. It is unfair, but it is objective because people are not equal to each other. Even even if they do not choose to be equal or not to be equal. This is how society works. Now, Mr. Speaker, if they care for fairness in the status quo so much, how about this? Higher costs in the status quo, which COA successfully has proven, because businesses do not know who has higher chance of having this or that hereditary disease. Businesses charge everyone certain higher premiums, Mr. Speaker, so that people who have lower risks of a hereditary disease pay higher premiums than they would have to pay if the company knew that they have lower risks, Mr. Speaker. Is that fair? So people who have higher risks in the status quo pay much lower premiums and enjoy it because other people pay higher premiums than they must pay, even though they have lower risks because they do not have those hereditary diseases. How fair is that? Now, Mr. Speaker, your second assertion is that the only criterion that works is choice or non-choice. We have successfully established that certain things, and actually a lot of things in our society, lead to higher premiums regardless of choice or non-choice on behalf of the client. Now, Mr. Speaker, to the philosophical core of our arguments, we have shown you how basically corporations, on one side, they aim for profits, they manage private assets, they risk their private assets, their own investment, their owners, right? And this is a very risky field because insurance companies have to deal with very uncertain future. Now, they need information, as much information as possible to evaluate those risks and to be as responsible players on the market and as successful players on the market as possible. Why, Mr. Speaker? Because if those companies fail because of poor risk management, nobody's going to bail them out, Mr. Speaker. Also, other clients of those companies will suffer because nobody will pay them their insurance if their insurance company fails, right? So those insurance companies need a plenty of information to manage all the risks correctly and ultimately fulfill their role in our society, protect people from future risks while dealing with an uncertain future. It's an enormous burden already, Mr. Speaker, but what the opposition wants to do is imposing an even huger burden on them. They never claim the responsibility, corporations never claim responsibility to treat everybody equally when it comes to their business goals, Mr. Speaker. They never took the responsibility to care for the weak part of our society. Who took that claim, Mr. Speaker? It is the government who does that. It is the government who receives public money in forms of taxes. It is the government who protects all the weak players in the status quo already. For example, people who have hereditary diseases who make them who have Down syndrome. The state cares for them for public money, but no private enterprise has the responsibility to hire a person with a Down syndrome, Mr. Speaker, because this imposes too huge a burden on them that they never claim. What happens when we impose that burden? Companies have to cover that burden, that enormous risk they take, by imposing higher prices on everyone, which creates an even unfair society. So we think that it's government's burden has to take care of it, because government has a social contract, has established a social contract between itself and society, receives money from the entire society, and aims for public good that is protecting the weak people ahead of strong people. And not profit, Mr. Speaker. Let the companies deal with what they have to deal with profit and their responsibility to their clients who pay them money, who choose them to provide them with that service. Now, Mr. Speaker, to our positive contribution, how it will make our society a better one, and an easier one to live, and a cheaper one to live, Mr. Speaker. COA has already proven how basically showing that for some people risks are lower than it can be imagined will lower premiums for those people and make insurance for them more accessible. Even more importantly, Mr. Speaker, because it will lower the risks for those insurance companies. They will have more incentive to take higher risks and to insure more people because they will have to risk less money, Mr. Speaker. This is very clear. This will actually increase the number of people who get insurance in the actual plan. But even more importantly, Mr. Speaker, this will provide for better health care for everyone. How? Imagine we're an insurance company and we want to lower our risks. What will be a rational way to do for us? We will ask all our clients to pass certain kind of genetic tests to find out whether they have propensity for certain hereditary diseases. What will it make, Mr. Speaker? It will contribute for better awareness of those diseases, right? People will know, okay, I have high propensity for diabetes, high propensity for cancer, high propensity risk for heart disease. And those diseases will be more easily prevented at an early stage. Isn't that clear, Mr. Speaker? So, prevention will again lower costs for the entire healthcare system and will help more money to include in insurance policies more people and to treat them more efficiently and to direct more money to where it is exactly needed and not for empty fears and empty risks, Mr. Speaker. What we have established is that the opposition has shown absolutely no grounds why it is the private enterprises that have to bear that burden, and we also have shown you how our plan contributes for a better, cheaper, safer, and healthier society.
I thank the second affirmative speaker. I call upon the second negative speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, we do not oppose all companies or all seeking their profit or like that, but generally we should respect companies' as we agree it is fair situation for the company. But however, in today's case, because insurance companies are directly related to the people's health and the future, and also because, especially for the US, as government set up, choosing insurance is citizens' responsibility in US, so that's why we have to give enough opportunity to choose them. And so that's why we believe this plan is actually actively rejecting customers' chance to getting insurance. So that's why we think this plan is so harmful and so unfair for the people who are actually having potential illness. So that's why we beg to oppose. So let me explain how after this proposal, people who rejected by company have to suffer with no insurance. Even there is several types of the insurance company. But before that, let me go to what the speaker said. So as I told you in my introduction, we believe this is having the insurance system is the citizen's responsibility, and government side told you this is governmental responsibility. This is not the company's responsibility, rather government responsibility. That's why they said this situation is no problem. But we believe this is in extreme cases it is governmental responsibility. However, in case that illness is just possibility like US, we believe it's individual responsibility, it's citizens' responsibility. We cannot say this is only the company's responsibility. And to take responsibility to the citizens, giving them enough chance to having insurance is necessary thing. It is actually a fair situation. So that's why we strongly opposing. So let me open to our argument. How after this proposal, people who rejected by company have to suffer with no insurance system. So after this proposal, company can check the result of genetic test. Company can calculate the risk of
as the first slave told you, and they no longer take health insurance. They just have to be worried about future business. And government side told you, maybe after tax proposal, there are companies which accept customers even who have potential illness, because there are many types of companies like set premium higher and higher. That's right. This is the situation is not so serious. It's okay. People can take insurance. But Mr. Speaker, this is unlikely to happen. After the proposal, people cannot take insurance. Why is that? Because after this proposal, companies use genetic tests generally, and who gather to higher premium insurance company is clear. People who reject from the other insurance company, which premium is standard or rather cheap. So what this situation means is high premium companies have multiple customers who have possibility of illness or who cost much. So that's why higher premium companies have only the customer who have much risk. So that's why to manage company, they need to make premium higher and higher and higher. And how higher is like enough to help customers. It means, in a sense, amount of company need is actually almost equal to the treatment fee. So that's why customers lose incentive to take insurance, because whether or not they have to pay so much amount of money. So that's why, as a consequence, those higher premium companies lose customers. They cannot gather the customer, even the rejected people. So that's why they cannot sustain managing. They will be bankrupt because of no profit. So that's why after they take their proposal, there is no company for the people who have possibility of illness, who are rejected from the other insurance companies. So they have to suffer situation without any insurance system. So even if they become illness, there is no insurance, so they cannot get enough money to go hospital. They cannot treat their illness. So that's why we say this situation is clearly harming to the people who are considered potential patients. So what is important is that this plan surely deprive many opportunities for the people to get insurance system. This plan deprive the opportunities to seek or find insurance for people who get the result of genetic test, which is like the potential cancer or potential cancer. So that's why we say this is harmful. And Mr. Speaker, insurance system is necessary thing. However, the governmental insurance system is actually depends on the government. Japan's health insurance system and the U.S. insurance system is quite different. It is depends on the government. But in this situation, we have to make the opportunity to get insurance system for the citizens, and especially for U.S. This plan is obviously obstacle for citizens to get insurance system. So that's why we have to avert, because if we take this proposal, it means government actively deprive the citizens opportunity to get their health, to get their protecting future. So that's why we totally oppose. Thank you.
Okay, the second native speaker, I don't want to be first for me.
side said, the people themselves are not responsible. That's why we cannot force that on companies, because they're not governmental entity in the first place. So we believe that such kind of the people who are unfortunately getting inherent disease, they should be provided with care by the government, because the company has no moral duty to help them in the first place. So to save the company, to save the right of the company to distinguish the customers, we are very proud to propose. And there are several things to examine. The first, such kind of being outside of the control can be a reason to put some responsibility on the company or not. And second, I examine the practical consequence of this proposal. Moving on, first issue about the criteria of the responsibility for private entity. The whole assumption of the opposition side is the companies has to be morally responsible for the people. But Mr. Speaker, my partner, the Prime Minister, already rebutted, so the company have no moral obligation to save inherent inferiority in such senses. Because the nature of the company is a profit oriented, so such kind of profit itself is a lifeline, so they somewhat have a duty to maximize their own profit. It has following the nature of the company. So that's why the information itself is absolutely needed. But the response from the opposition side is it's so immoral and we have to fix that. The several response. Number one is that they never tell you why private entity has to be responsible for inherent the structure of the body in the first place. And the second reason is it can never be a reason they have to be treated equally, because individuals have a different characteristic in the first place. So that's why my partner already told you that being stupid can be a reason to be supported by the government in case of job application. And moreover, we say that this occasion is totally same as a chronic disease, which is not responsible for the individual, but they are currently rejected by the private entity because of the characteristic of each individual. And further that even though they are not responsible and not responsible to the situation, to their body condition, but it's not responsible for the private entity, but responsible for the state. So it's job of the state. That's why Obamacare is introduced even in the United States. So there's no reason for the company to be responsible for the individual failure. So immorality itself, there can't be a reason to accept the plan of the opposition side. And the second reason they support their proposal is that they just have a possibility to be bad. But Mr. Speaker, as a smoking or other than being younger driving or being old, it's just a possibility of their disease. But according to their analysis, it is okay to discriminate the smoker or the old smoker or other drinker or other kind of people because it's their own fault. Number one, so they never draw a line between the intention for the company to discriminate. What is such kind of intentional action can be a reason to discriminate others. They never explain it in the first place. And moreover, according to their analysis, as long as the smokers or the younger driving or being old, they can be rejected because it increases the possibility of the disease. Yes, we can reduce it, also this case because it increases the possibility of the disease. And so just having a possibility can never be a reason to be responsible for a private entity. But the propositions that I clearly explained to you, the way
accident record income insurance, the innate possibility should be considered as a criteria to be distinguished by the private entity. But they never responded this point in the first place. So considering those two criteria, the immorality can never be a reason to support the private as the individual responsibility of the private entity, and just having a possibility can never be a reason we impose such responsibility on the private entity. But we clearly told you this is totally being in the sphere of the distinguished for the private entity, because it is totally related to their profit, and as long as the government respects the nature of the company profit orientation, so we have to respect it in the first place. And moving on to the second issue about the benefit and harm of this proposal. Mainly the two major harms come from the opposition side. So I examined them one by one. The first, there's no company who supports such kind of as a genetic inherently bad person. But my partner already responded if there is a prospect of profit and they have absolutely needed such kind of private insurance, the company will create the private insurance program for such kind of people. And second, such kind of isolation or denial by the company is not a major issue in the first place. The second issue about the higher premium compared with the other kind of things. Number one is they never distinguish any other. So why this situation is particularly pernicious when we compare other kind of premiums, the condition of premiums. Of course, the incur insurance, the people who have the car accident record, they have to get higher premium compared with the ordinary people. So they couldn't draw a line between the root cause of getting higher premium in the first place. So we couldn't understand why this motion is so pernicious in the first place. And moreover, even though such kind of premium itself is bad and no one can be held by the company, but it doesn't matter for the private entity, because of course the state have a responsibility to care about the citizens collectively. That's why the Obamacare introduced, and that's why the government set the program to save the economically poor people and who can't get insurance because of their poverty. And so such kind of countermeasure is already introduced by the state. So even though such kind of thing is pernicious, but as long as the state has responsibility, private entity should not have to be responsible in this case. So to pursue the profit and to save the rights of the company, we are very proud to propose.
I think the third affirmative speaker, I call upon the third negative speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What the government is trying to say is that companies are not responsible at all and the government are responsible, right? However, what the government can do is limited. There is a limitation in terms of development, and especially in the case of the United States, as my partner has told you, that because the United States cannot make insurance system as a nation, we think that other insurance company should take responsibility to accept such people as even other parts. But why we because even in the status quo, the companies are not allowed to access to this gene information. However, we think that in the status quo, there's no company bankrupt because of the lack of information of genes, and therefore we think that in the first place, that it's really doubtful whether we should solve the benefit that they can provide is really limited, and therefore we think the necessity to take this plan is really limited. Second of all, they said that there are two things that is already allowed for the company. There are a lot of information that company are already allowed to access, and the information is a kind of that. We don't think so. Let's cope with one by one. First of all, they said that, especially the first speaker told us that companies are already allowed to access information like criminal records or academic records or so on. We think that these kind of things are already relevant because these kind of things are not future possibility, but describing that current situation, like in the case of criminal record, that it is evidence that they've already committed crime, or in the case of academic ability, it show that ability status quo is not good. And second of all, they said that the insurance company already allowed to access the information that are in obesity or smoking. The information is kind of that, so on. We don't think so. First of all, what the difference between the gene test information and obesity or smoking habit is that in the first place that the result of the gene test is just a possibility of disease and is not the disease at all. On the other hand, we say the obesity or smoking habit are kind of initiating of that disease because this kind of like smoking habit are already damaging their body and making a lot of pressure on their bodies, and therefore we think that it can be seen as a kind of disease. We think it's a clear difference there. And second of all, we think that they said that possibility of the future possibility is the same. Therefore, we should cope with that in the same way. We don't think so in the case of obesity or smoking habit because it was a choice of the people themselves that it's highly possibility in the future they will get a severe disease. However, in the case of gene disease, we can cope with that and we can lessen the possibility to get in a serious disease. For example, if someone knows that my gene is more likely to be in a heart attack in the future, and then maybe they will try to eat vegetables more or try to exercise more or so on. And therefore, even in terms of possibility, there's clear difference. And third of all, yes, and therefore we think that all of the information is allowed now, and this information is clearly different thing. And therefore, in terms of gene, it's still low possibility of disease and we think that just for that, discriminating these potential people is immoral. And why we are saying immoral is that this point is why immoral is important. They said because the government are responsible, the company's immorality is not important at all. We don't think so. What my partner I've already told you, because it is totally depend on the companies. That company might close the door to these people or potentially these people. We think that this because the government capacity is limited, that government should impose should make company be responsible to give an opportunity to join in such insurance. That's what my partner has told you. So this is my first point. Moving on to my second point, let's compare the benefit or harm that we raised after this proposal. The two kinds of benefit, maybe the practical benefit came from the government side. One, that it's actually good for all people. that this kind of is really this kind of benefit is really limited because maybe the people who diagnosis as this gene disease is not so big, and therefore we think that it's really doubtful whether the price will be cheaper or not. Second, they said they can raise the awareness for the health or so on. In that case, we think that this price is not necessary because what we have to do is just let people to just make people to take the gene test. It's not necessary for the government it's not necessary to allow this something the company. Rather, what we have told you is that the company will reject these people and my partner has told you that if the company see that the risk of this is too risky, we have told you that this company will bankrupt, and therefore in the highest extremely risk, the company will not help this, and in that case, there's no reputation came from the outside. That's why we want to propose.
Thank you, third native speaker. I call upon the native reply speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So genetic tests not guarantee that they will get the disease in the future. It is not really sure about it. And those people who are regarded as that they will have the disease because of the results of those genetic tests, even though they are healthy, they need to pay higher amounts, or they need to go to the insurance which is specifically made for those people, and this is actually hinder access of those people, and this is a direct harm for the citizens. Even because this action of those companies that they will use the genetic test as a consequence, because this is harm those citizens like and life choice that they would like to have the insurance, because this proposal must be forced. So we will be proud to oppose. I have two characters to sum up this way. First one is what is okay for making conditions to higher premium, and we definitely say genetic test is no. And second criteria is the practical consequence, how is it severe or not. So let me compare one by one. So about the genetic test. So we clearly told you what can be a condition and what should not be. We told you something it is choice, it's totally okay to make conditions like the status quo, and something it already making a consequence is okay in the status quo, and we support these kind of things. For example, something it is choice is the smoking, because those people are choose to be a smoker. And for example, like other kind of example is like obese, because these people is choose to become obese, right? Because they seek the certain kind of lifestyle. That's why those people have a choice to actually become this. That's why we can recognize this as a legitimate conditions to make higher premium. And second one, consequence, because this is already have some kind of disease, or we can see that they are not profitable in a sure way. We believe this can also can be regarded as a condition. But what we see is bad to recognize this genetic test is the genetic test is something determining people in terms of future possibility. This is really not sure about the future, and whether this kind of disease would occur or not is really not guaranteed. And because this is just a possibility, we are denying these kind of the conditions. The response from the government was like that, because these companies are not responsible to actually protect those citizens, or because companies are not responsible for the act that they need to actually supposed to help those people. But even if what we have told you from our argument is if the process of those companies' activity is really harming the people, we should not actually recognize this as a legitimate thing, even for the company, and because this harm is goes to some people, right? In that sense, as we clearly see the harm from this genetic test, so we think this should not be recognized as something we can put for the condition in the first place. Moving on to our second one. So what we have told us as a harm to this proposal is because this price of insurance could get higher, and the status quo, some people cannot have a choice to those specific types of insurance. So because this insurance is something that's a whole life, this is a necessary choice for some people, and that's what we have told you. So the only response from the government was just stick with the idea that company's right is important, and company is not responsibility for the government. But we believe that is not really engaging to our point, because company itself is harming the citizens, and because this act itself has an influence for the society, and because this insurance is really needed, especially in the context of the US. People need a choice to actually have a private insurance. We believe this harm stands in those contexts. So because this system is necessary, and because this is not guaranteed, we're very proud of it.
I thank the negative reply speaker. I call upon the affirmative reply speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the opposition wants to frame this as people being unjustly deprived of health care. Proposition wants to frame this as people unjustly enjoying health care at discount prices at the corporations and other healthy people's expense. 2 points in today's reply. Firstly, can the private sector differentiate based on criteria outside the range of the individual's field of choice? Secondly, the practical consequences of taking this proposal, but before that, several points in rebuttal which does not actually fit into the summary. They talk about how everybody's right to healthcare is fundamental, but they accept that smoking, you're allowed to discriminate on smoking and other pre-existing conditions. That is compatible how, right? They told you that choice is one criteria, and yet they told you that the possibility of illness is another criteria. Mr. Speaker, what we want to examine is we fully accept that the possibility of illness is a criteria. That is why we are all for having pre-existing conditions and all for accessing genetic reports. But what about something that lies outside the field of choice, right? So what happens, what does the op presented to you on that point? Op tells you it's a lottery of birth. Nobody can take responsibility for it. Mr. Speaker, proposition tells you precisely nobody can take responsibility for it. How then can you take this responsibility that nobody can take responsibility for and transfer that to the corporation at the cost of profits which are being lost by that corporation, Mr. Speaker? No explanation on their side of the house as to why we can connect this responsibility and transfer it to the burden of the corporation and the company. We say, yes, it's a lottery of birth, right? But Max already told you, old age, younger drivers, all these things which are inherently nothing to do with the choices that people make, we allow the companies to use as criteria for differentiation. Why is that? Because what the opposition told you. The opposition told you that it's because the companies prioritize profits, the companies prioritize stability, the companies prioritize the existence of their company, because it is with their own capital that they make these investments. It is with their own decisions that they are responsible for the well-being of not just their clientele, but also their employees, Mr. Speaker. That is why companies have no moral obligation to look at the weaknesses and the strengths of people who just at the time that they were born, Mr. Speaker. And that is why we think that just because something ranges outside the field of choice of the individual, it does not mean that you can guarantee that becomes the choice of the corporation. We think that we have won on the philosophical consequences of this debate. Secondly, we look at the practical consequences, right? Opposition tells you there are people who are left uninsured. That is pernicious. Mr. Speaker, people are left uninsured in the status quo by private insurers anyway, because as Max and Yonaga told you, there are people who are too poor to pay insurance, right? But we told you that that is not the moral responsibility of the corporation to cover people who can't meet company standards. It's the proposition, it's the state's responsibility, maybe. Is it the private sector's responsibility? No, Mr. Speaker. We think that therefore the practical consequences that the opposition have actually told you and has repeated in their arguments are not actually practical consequences at all, but something that must occur and is a necessary evil that needs to be tolerated if you look at the very nature of the private sector. What have we told you on our side of the house for the practical benefits? We told you firstly that this lowers the insurance premiums for people who have been currently left in the dark because they didn't know about the genetic makeup of themselves, and people who are now perfectly healthy from at the moment they are born can now enjoy lower health premiums, nothing that is engaged on their side of the house. We also told you that this leads to an alert mechanism where people who are applying for healthcare are also going to take genetic tests, thereby being able to predetermine and be pre-warned of what kind of conditions they have and work towards that. Mr. Speaker, we're very proud to propose.